I don't believe that the plant path is a choice. I believe that it's something much older and deeper and darker than anything that we could have ever imagined, that we can actually grasp as human beings. I believe it's a calling that's been born in our bones and our blood, that's been forgotten for generations, laying dormant, sometimes showing itself at the most crucial of times. So often our path does not take us where we thought that it would, and yet we find ourselves in the exact place that we need to be. And this is the medicine of the plants, this is the medicine of the path. You can hear the geese are returning. We've been hearing the geese coming home for the past couple of weeks now, and I am so excited because that's really the first indication that spring is returning, or as we call in Michigan, mud season. Yeah, that's not good. And yeah, it's been, an interesting couple of weeks getting back into the swing of spring and growing and starting seeds and all of those wonderful things. But as we've, sort of entered this new season, I've been thinking a lot about beginnings as well, my own beginnings and how I started this path as an herbalist. And I just wanted to share some of those musings in my head that I've thought are maybe some of the most important lessons that I've learned being an herbalist over these past years, and share that with you. So the first and maybe most important lesson that I've learned on my herbalism journey is that you need to trust the path, because this is a very, complex and winding path, and it usually is born from either illness yourself, and then you're trying to find a way to, bring this to the world, and you've realized how powerful plants can be, and so you're trying to heal and find a way to spread that healing as well. Or, maybe the plants are just calling to you in general, and, you're hearing it for the first time, and it can be confusing, overwhelming, who knows? And so really, on this path though, I've found that it's really more of a calling. It's not so much as we have this sort of choice in the matter, if you will. And so I think the plants really bring us to this path and, sort of speak through us in the way that the medicine needs to be spread. So for example, when I became an herbalist, I didn't really want to, offer products. I didn't want to put products out into the world because it's a very complicated sector of the herbalism world to be in. You've got to deal with, the regulations, the FDA, the insurance, the logistics of, shipping things across the country, across the world. There's so much that goes into it, and it's just a lot. I didn't know that I would still be doing that, years later. I just thought that this was a way to, start making a living off of doing the thing that I love, sharing the medicine that I love. And yet every time that I've tried to sort of stray from the path and do something different, it just didn't feel right. And so I've always come back to the product side of things and just being able to share the medicine in that way for people who might not have access to the plants near them or have access to a one-on-one consult with an herbalist or a naturopath. It's been so rewarding and yes, very challenging. But, I never thought that this is where I would be all these years down the road. And so really what's kept me going is just trusting the path, trusting that the plants are leading me to where I need to go to spread the medicine that needs to be spread, and, just leaning into the discomfort. And we talk about that all the time, but it's so true. And it's the hardest thing to do too, is to lean into that discomfort. and trust the path. But yeah, there's a quote from The Witcher, actually, which really struck me as soon as I heard it. It said, "Trust your path and it will protect you." And as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, this speaks to my herbalist soul here, because this is, the same thing that we deal with on a daily basis, because truly we are vessels. This is, not something we go into to be rich or famous. This is something we do because we love, because we've been called, because we have to. And so that's one of the most important lessons I've learned. The next lesson that I wanted to share with you kind of goes along those sort of lines, but it's the fact that as herbalists, we're not healers. Herbalists are not healers. I don't consider myself a healer. I am a mediator between the plant world and the human world. And in traditional societies, this is how it's always been. Especially, the healer would actually live outside of the village. They live on the edge of the forest, on the edge of civilization. So not only are healers sort of this figurative mediator between worlds, but in traditional societies, they physically, were the mediator between worlds. They physically lived with one foot in the wild world and one foot in the human world as well. And so when you think of being an herbalist in this way, it's almost a much bigger responsibility, to be the sort of mediator between humans and plants, to help people understand the powers of plants, to connect the right medicine with the right person. And so that's a big responsibility, but it's really how I view myself as an herbalist, not so much a healer, but a mediator. And the next lesson that I've learned is that we need to break this stigma of the fear around plants. And this may seem silly, but the more you think about it, the more you realize there is this deep sort of inset fear that many people have around plants, especially when they first sort of enter this herbal plant medicine world, because, you go on WebMD and they're like, this plant could be toxic. It could cause all these crazy side effects. And, this one particular compound among hundreds of compounds in this one plant, when taken in giant doses, may cause these side effects or may cause harm. And so there's just this fear that's been sort of implanted in us, as if plants were some sort of man-made synthetic chemical like our prescription drugs. But plants and chemicals and drugs are not the same thing. Even if there is potentially, one compound that could cause some toxicity way down the line, if you take a ton of it, then, people consider this dangerous. But as herbalists, once you break through that barrier, you can see, the healing power in these sorts of plants. And of course, it's always important to be aware of what you're putting in the body, to be cautious, to really be vigilant, and only do what you're comfortable with. But I feel like to not work with a plant because of this inset fear is just really sad. And I see it in the wild a lot too. People are so afraid to eat things right off the ground or eat things right off the tree, which is so crazy, especially considering, the processed food in our diets and all of these crazy things that we put into our body. And yet something that's fresh and green and something that, people have been eating for hundreds of thousands of years, people are afraid, and it's so sad. And, that's part of the process, though, is to break that stigma once, you become an herbalist and start working with those more low-dose plants or more sort of controversial plants. And of course, just do whatever you feel comfortable with. But that was a big thing, just to recognize that there is this sort of stigma, this fear around plants, which we don't really talk about a lot. And then the next lesson that I've learned, and has been a big relief to learn, is that I don't have to do everything myself as an herbalist. I don't have to grow everything. I don't have to make every product, every formula out there. There's this idea that we need to be self-sufficient. And I think it's good to move towards, relying less on the government and society and all of those things. But I rather would move towards community sufficiency and being able to rely on others, because when you try to do everything yourself, it's just so overwhelming and exhausting. So when you can literally just focus on growing what you like to grow, making what you like to make and are good at making, and working with the seasons in that way, it's kind of liberating, you know. And on top of that, it's just really sort of a pleasure to be able to rely on other herbalists, other growers, other makers to work with the things that they're good at making. It's just like magical. Like, there are some things that I could never make the way other people make. There's also this French word called terroir. Forgive my pronunciation, but it's this idea that it's a wine term, but it's the idea that, this potion, this brew, this sort of extraction holds the flavor and the essence of the place in which it was grown. So when I take a medicinal preparation that was, grown and harvested and made in the Southwest, in the, the desert, it's totally different than something that would be made here in the woods in the North. And it's so magical to be able to connect with that medicine, connect with the intention of that herbalist. And so I highly, I'm a big proponent of not only, trying different medicines from different parts of the world, from different herbalists who are so good at making their own sort of preparations, but also to support those herbalists. This is such a diverse and wonderful community, and, not without its flaws, but we really need to support each other in this time. And so really being a part of that is so important and so freeing, like I said, to just have that extra space to do what you want to do and not get overwhelmed. And then the last lesson that I wanted to share with you today, and of course there are so many lessons that I'm constantly learning from the plants, the land, the forest, the animals, but this lesson is that with great love comes great responsibility. And because you can't become an herbalist or be an herbalist with just taking from the earth, taking from the land, taking from the people, and giving nothing back. Maybe you can, but that kind of goes against everything that we believe as herbalists. So yeah, it's really important, because you can't just treat the body, treat the spirit, treat the emotions, the mind, without treating the greater collective, without treating and supporting and being voices for our fellow humans, for the land, for the animals, for the plants that are up against, so many, threats and all of these things. And that can be overwhelming too. That can be really overwhelming, because as you walk on this journey, you realize that you start to hear sort of the heartbeat of the earth, if you will. You start to feel that. You start to feel the connection between every living thing, every living human being, every animal, every plant. And so that can be a lot for people who feel deeply, who care deeply. And I think it's important to feel that. But when I start getting overwhelmed by this, I have to remember I don't have the option to let it overwhelm me. I don't have the time to let it overwhelm me, because there's too much to do. There's too many things to plant, too many things to create, too many people to support and work with. We just don't have the time.
And I just wanted to clarify here, I think it is very important to feel all of your emotions and experience all of the things that come along with your emotions, with your feelings. It's part of being human. I'm just talking about the point where it becomes an overwhelm, the point where it keeps you from doing the things that you love to do, the things that can help the world move forward, the things that help you to love and celebrate and embrace all of the beautiful things in life, because no matter what, there is always something to celebrate, something to admire and enjoy. So whenever I do feel like I'm getting to that point of overwhelm, I go outside, I take a walk, I plant something, I draw something, I read something, I just do something. There just needs to be a point where the feelings and the emotions just take a rest.
And like the great Elizabeth Gilbert has said, because the world is turning and the clock is ticking, and we simply don't have time to think so small anymore. And I think about that all the time when things get heavy or rough. And so, yeah, those are some of the biggest lessons I've learned thus far. And I'm constantly learning as well. So let me know if you relate to that at all, or if there's any other big lessons that you've learned and would like to share. But until next time, I will see you later.